Hi, everyone. This week, I want to begin with a shout out to Brooke Anderson, aka at Movement Photographer on Instagram, whose beautiful photos are part of the montage you just saw. Brooke's been working tirelessly at nearly all the demonstrations and rallies to document our resistance, as she's done so many times in the past, and we're grateful for her labor and comradeship in service of movements. As always, I'm Thomas Maria Dawson with Center for Political Education. I'm joining you from the occupied lands of the Ohlone people in the East Bay of California. We encourage all our participants located in the Bay Area to pay their Shumi land tax, which you can do by following the link in the chat. Speaking of the chat, it will be disabled for these calls, except for us to share information with the audience. If you have questions you'd like to get answered during the call, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll try our best to answer them there. In that same toolbar, you can find the CC button to enable closed captioning. We're also grateful to have ASL interpreters on hand throughout this call. On behalf of CPE, Bay Resistance, Arab Resource and Organizing Center, and the Anti-Police Terror Project, welcome to Palestine Solidarity Announcements. This PSA is being live streamed only on this webinar, and that's how you'll be able to access it. Last week, we live streamed it on Haymarket, but moving forward, we'll be providing these recordings on Center for Political Education YouTube page. We're returning after a week off where we rolled out to the federal courthouse in Oakland in support of our brave Palestinian comrades who filed a case against Joe Biden and his administration for its failure to prevent and complicity in the genocide in Gaza. Today's agenda is as follows. First, Melissa Fan will lead us in a somatics grounding practice. These short practices can be a useful way to check in with ourselves, harness our focus, and build resiliency in our mind and body to sustain our work. Next, we're honored and grateful to have Asta Sharma Pokharel from CCR join us for a third time to help us understand the significance of the Oakland Federal Court's decision this past Wednesday to dismiss the case against the Biden administration, the importance of the court going on record in that decision to assert the plausibility of genocide, and where things go from here. Then Samer Arabi from Iraq is back to share information and analysis on political developments internationally and in the US. Next, as our movements have increased their capacities to identify and assess the political economy supporting war making and imperialism, we've also increased our opportunities to apply pressure directly to war profiteers. Continuing the information sharing that Claire Byard began a few weeks ago, Sarah Fatala from Bay Area Palestine Solidarity, or BAPS, will deepen our understanding of the streams of capital flowing into the war machine and give us a short case study of L3 Harris, one of the companies targeted by protesters over the past week. Finally, Connie Choi from APEN will give us some updates on legislative advocacy and priorities for engaging electeds at the current time. As always, thank you again for joining us. Please continue your efforts to stop this genocide and free Palestine. And with that, I'll turn it over to Melissa.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. I want to start us off today with a quote by Mossab Abu Toha, who is a Palestinian poet and himself was detained as a hostage by the IOF in November. The quote goes, "In a state of siege, the Palestinian poet Mahmoud Darwish writes something that is difficult to translate. We do what jobless people do, he says. We raise hope. The verb narabi, meaning to raise or to rear, is what a parent does for a child, or what a farmer does for crops. Hope is a difficult word for Palestinians. It is not something that others give us, but something that we must cultivate and care for on our own. We have to help grow hope." And so let's answer the call to grow hope and practice some hope growing today. When you're ready, please get yourself into a comfortable position. You can be seated, laying down, or standing. And we'll just start off with a couple of deep breaths together. Going at your own pace, breathing all the way to the bottom of your diaphragm, feeling your lungs expand and contract. Feeling your rib cage and your belly rise and fall. Finding now the bottom of your feet. Just noticing what sensations are there. If it feels hot or cold, what textures you might feel if you're wearing socks and shoes, or if you're bare feet. And now doing the same for the very top of your head, the top of your crown. Noticing the temperature, the sensations, the textures. And beginning to identify what the concept of hope feels like in your body. If hope is a practice, if hope is something that we cultivate and we grow, what does a seed of hope feel like internally? For me, it feels like an opening in the center of my body, radiating from my chest. Hope makes my body want to straighten up. Just noticing for yourself what it feels like to have hope. And then seeing if you can expand this feeling just a little bit. Maybe that means rolling your shoulders back a little bit, having your head held higher. Maybe it means identifying a color for hope and letting that seep into more of your body. Trust that your body has that wisdom inside. Let us continue to cultivate hope for Palestinian liberation and for the liberation of all peoples on earth. Thank you.
Thanks, Melissa. Now to provide us with an update on the DCI Palestine v. Biden case, we have Asta Shamra Pukral from CCR.
Thanks, Thomas. Thank you so much. And thanks to all of you who are here today. And thanks to those of you who might have been in court last week on Friday when we had this hearing. So as you all know, on January 26th, we had the hearing in Oakland and in federal court in the case filed by Palestinians against Biden, Blinken, and Austin for their failure to prevent and their complicity in the genocide in Gaza. And the hearing was on two motions, a preliminary injunction motion that we filed, that the plaintiffs filed in this case, and then a motion to dismiss that the defendants filed in this case. And we went in for what would be oral arguments on some of the legal questions, and then live testimony by our plaintiffs and an expert on genocide and Holocaust studies, Dr. Barry Trachtenberg. For those of you who were able to see it, you know it was an incredibly powerful hearing. It went on for about 4 hours, and it was the first that I know of where Palestinians were able to testify in US federal court about the horrors that they and their loved ones are currently facing. They were able to testify about the genocide in Gaza, and they were able to testify about Israeli occupation and apartheid and the history of settler colonialism. We heard from a Palestinian doctor who was calling in from Gaza. He was calling in from the floor of a hospital that he spends 24 hours a day in. He described what he's been seeing for the past 4 months, who he's been treating. He described the impact on his family. Our other plaintiffs, as witnesses, testified about the horrors that their families in Gaza are facing today as a result of the genocide. And they also testified about the history of Israeli violence, of settler colonialism in Palestine. They talked about Nakba in US federal court. And they testified about the places in Gaza that they loved, their homes, their schools, the parks, the beaches, the places that Israel has now, with the US support, with the support of the United States, has destroyed. And Dr. Trachtenberg, the scholar on the Holocaust and other genocides, he testified to the reality of this genocide and described how often genocides are acknowledged and accountability is sought kind of retrospectively, but how in this situation we have a unique opportunity where we're seeing this genocide being broadcasted in real time on our screens, and and in this case, the court in particular, has the opportunity to end it. So it was a really historic hearing, I think, especially because of the testimony that our clients and this expert were able to provide. The government's main argument on that day was based on what's known as the political question doctrine. So this idea or this doctrine that a court does not have the power to resolve the case because it doesn't have the power to tell the executive what to do, to tell the executive what to do on matters of foreign affairs, even in this case when we're talking about genocide. And I'll come back to that in a moment. And at the end of the hearing, the judge said, you know, this is the most difficult case that I've ever had to decide. He said, this is the most difficult case factually. It's the most difficult case legally that that court had ever had to decide. And we could tell from the way the hearing went that this judge was taking the case really, really seriously, the facts of the case and the evidence of genocide really, really seriously, and also that he was grappling with the political question doctrine. And so I think there was a link put in the chat of the hearing, which you can watch. It's pretty long. Like I said, it was about 4 hours, but it's in clips. So if you weren't able to watch it, it's fully online. And you know, those of you who were there know about all of the organizing that was going on outside of the courthouse, the rally, the painting, the street painting, the puppets, and it was honestly incredible to see all that from inside the courthouse when we stepped out for our recesses. There were multiple recesses in a 4-hour-long hearing. We would step out and see you all, some of you all who were there. And then to walk out into that was just really incredible. And I think reflects, the fact that that rally was organized by groups who have been pushing on so many other fronts, who've been protesting, rallying, shutting down the port, blocking boats, who occupied the federal building next door to the courthouse that we were at several months ago. Just a reminder that what happened that day in court and this filing and this litigation is just one of the many tools that we're using. So as Thomas said earlier this week, we got the judge's ruling, and I'm going to share my screen in a moment, but he ultimately denied our preliminary injunction motion and granted the defendant's motion to dismiss our case. And I think this is a really important ruling that I want to share some points that he included, that the court included in there in its order. So first, the court said, like the ICJ, that this U.S. federal court is independently finding that Israel's assault and siege on Gaza is plausibly a genocide. I'm reading from the second sentence of this paragraph, where the court says, both the uncontroverted testimony of the plaintiffs and the expert opinion proffered at the hearing on these motions, as well as statements made by various officers of the Israeli government, indicate that the ongoing military siege in Gaza is intended to eradicate a whole people and therefore plausibly falls within the international prohibition on genocide. And so with this, you see that, this federal court, based on the testimony of our plaintiffs and based on the testimony of experts that were submitted in this case, not only uplifts the ICJ and underscores the ICJ's provisional measures, the ICJ's orders, but independently is finding, based on the evidence before it, that what Israel is doing in Gaza plausibly constitutes a genocide. I think it's really significant and is an important pronouncement to use to shift those who have so far dismissed or not taken seriously the allegations or the case of genocide against Israel. I also want to just underscore the sentence at the very end of this paragraph, or at the beginning of the second paragraph, where he says it's every individual's obligation to confront the current siege in Gaza, which is, I think, remarkable for a federal court to say. But then the court notes sort of the limitations, which is referring to the political question doctrine, which I'll get to in a moment. The second piece that I wanted to uplift is in the conclusion of the order, and I can share a link in a moment to all these filings. The order is relatively short, so if you want to take a look at it, I think it's worth reading. From the final sentence of this paragraph, the court implores defendants to examine the results of their unflagging support of the military siege against the Palestinians in Gaza. I think it's significant because it is a U.S. federal court recognizing the unequivocal support that the U.S. has provided to Israel, the unconditional support that the U.S. has provided to Israel, and linking that with the current genocide. And as we all know, the support that the U.S. has provided to Israel is an important source of Israel's history of violence and impunity. And so for a federal court to acknowledge that and to draw those connections, I think is extremely significant. The first sentence of this paragraph, he says, there are rare cases, and this is a rare case, he says, in which the preferred outcome is inaccessible to the court. He's referring here to the political question doctrine. So again, the idea that a court should not interfere in matters of foreign policy. And in this case, you have a court acknowledging that there's a plausible case of genocide and acknowledging US support for it. And so this is an instance in which the political question is used, and we think wrongly applied, to immunize the defendants from liability in this context. It's used to deprive a federal court of the power that it inherently has to, at the very least, determine what the law is and apply the law in the case and to the facts of this case. And so it's a doctrine that is used to, again, immunize the executive, to shield them from accountability. And in this case, we disagree with the court's application of it to these facts. We disagree with the decision, and we're thinking about next steps on this. I think it's important to recognize the significance of the factual findings that the court has made about the underlying genocide and about the US support for it. This language of a court imploring defendants to do something while recognizing it doesn't have the power to resolve the case, I think is extremely significant and unprecedented and damning to defendants. Defendants should really be thinking hard about their liability here. But the way in which the political question doctrine is used to shield them is wrong. And legally, I mean, we disagree with this. So we will continue to pursue the avenues of relief that are available to our clients, and are thinking about next steps and what needs to be done on this front to do what we can to put an end to this genocide and to the US support for it. I am going to put a link in the chat, unless someone has already, that includes the filings that we submitted in this case, and also includes the order from the court, so you all can. Oh, someone already. Thank you. Already put it in the chat. So, and then I'll pause there, and I'll see if there's any questions in the Q&A. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Asta, for all of your work on this case, and for CCR's legal team and Mark van der Hoed's legal team for putting on all this work and helping and keep us apprised of what's going on. And we're hope to continue to support you all through this as you all consider next steps with the legal strategy. Now we'll hear from Samer from AROC with some updates on political developments.
Thanks, Thomas, and always a pleasure to be here. My name is Samer. I'm a member of the Arab Resource and Organizing Center. I weekly do these sort of updates on the situation on the ground and any political developments. As always, there is so much that has happened in the past 7 days that it's really hard to encapsulate it into a short update. So I apologize for all the things I would have liked to include, but I did not. So let me just share my screen very quickly. All right, so as I usually like to do, I start in Gaza with what's happening on the ground there, zoom out to Palestine, talk about what's happening in the Middle East generally, and then the sort of international political landscape, and then zoom back in locally, nationally at the US, and then down to the Bay Area. So just jumping right into what's been happening in Gaza, another really horrific week. The death toll as of last Friday hit 26,000, and as of today, I think hit 27,000. So just to note that the rate of murder and destruction has not abated. So since the decision at the ICJ, there hasn't been a real marked reduction in the violence. And so we're seeing a sort of continued sustained bombardment of Gaza, basically at exactly the level that it was before. And all of this, as a reminder, without the killing or capture of a single senior Hamas commander. The only one that Israel has actually killed was in Lebanon. So 27,000 dead just from the military attack specifically, without in any way achieving what they claim to be their stated objective, which every day becomes clearer is not in fact their objective. I wanted to draw folks' attention to this incredible new tool that put out by The Guardian that is the interactive map of the destruction in Gaza. It's this red is the destruction of buildings, so of like physical infrastructure. So you could just see the sort of extent of it. That is not the extent of the damage. It's just the extent of buildings that are damaged. So all the remaining area in green is agriculture areas that were also destroyed. So it gives you a sense of the extent to which a concerted campaign to make Gaza unlivable is sort of continuing underway. And you know, these slides will be shared, and links to this information will be in the slideshow if folks want to look at it later. As always, I just like to note that the human toll in Gaza goes far beyond the specific military operation, but everything that sort of surrounds it. As of yesterday, they had reported 19,000 orphaned babies with no adults to care for them. And so like those numbers aren't captured when we look at the sort of death and injury numbers, along with sort of like the attacks on basic human infrastructure. So the lack of access to drinking water, the lack of access to food, the prevalence of disease, all of which is being exacerbated by the weather right now. In terms of the current state of the Israeli military campaign, they have more or less declared that they have succeeded in Khan Yunis, which is the largest city in southern Gaza, in a similar way that they had done in Gaza City previously. It seems to be part of a sort of concerted effort to move progressively south. So the remaining location is Rafah, the border crossing with Egypt, which was the original spot that the Israelis had claimed was a safe zone, which has been bombarded nonstop for the past 4 months, but will be probably the site of the next major campaign, but also probably this idea of like a withdrawal of forces and a moving steadily south is probably an indication that the Israeli military understands that like the situation they're in is sort of unwinnable, and they're starting to move towards a sort of exit process. Maybe, with this sort of stuff, you never really know. But given the talks of a ceasefire that have been happening recently, it does seem that that is the likely trajectory. Meanwhile, the areas that are liberated in northern Gaza that Israel claims the fighting to be over in is still seeing sites of horrific atrocities. And I really appreciated that Melissa started with a quote from the same poet who actually provided the first notification of like this discovery of mass graves. And I did want to note that just like the sort of macabre reality of what's happening in Gaza, where the attacks on journalists have become so widespread and so comprehensive that we now get our news from poets. Zooming out a little bit to Palestine, just a few like ongoing horrors that a few documented instances of the Israeli army using Palestinians as human shields, which again, they like to accuse Hamas of, despite there never being any documented evidence of it, whereas there is plenty of documented evidence of the Israeli army using Palestinians literally as human shields right in front of them as they walk. And most of you probably saw the raid at a West Bank hospital where Israeli security forces dressed up as Palestinian women and then executed 3 Palestinians in their beds, one of whom was a paraplegic in a coma. Just to say, like the sort of war crimes continue unabated. The biggest news probably of the week since the ICJ decision was the sort of UNRWA crisis, where the day that the ICJ announced that there was plausible evidence of genocide, the US decided to pull its funding from UNRWA, the UN agency that provides relief to Palestinians. they did this based on an unverified claim by the Israeli military, who refused to provide evidence that 12 members of UNRWA were involved in the October 7th attacks. They have since reduced that number from 12 to 4, and that's out of 30,000 UNRWA staff. Just to give you a sense of how absurd this sort of characterization and accusation is, leading to a really horrific situation where many countries have pulled funding from this vital humanitarian lifeline to Palestine in a moment where the need could not be higher. The resulting expected humanitarian catastrophe from this collective punishment, which would be unprecedented in scale if the funding is gone. And again, is based on the idea that 0.0004% of this agency has some sort of tenuous, unproven link to the attacks. The thought of cutting off that humanitarian aid is so grave that the Israeli security establishment themselves have said that it would be a really bad idea for UNRWA to collapse in this moment, just to give you a sense of the scale of horror that is being introduced here, largely by the Biden administration and by other countries that are following suit. In past PSAs, I've often talked about what's been happening in Yemen and the ongoing the ongoing shipping concerns through the Red Sea that have resulted in increasingly escalated violence as the US tries to sort of like militarily fix that problem, which has not been working. And the inevitable result of that military escalation this week was that as the sort of like military tit for tat has been escalating after several near deaths of US service members, now 3 soldiers in Jordan have been killed by a drone strike, 3 US soldiers. And it's worth noting that these soldiers are reservists, right? Not like active military personnel, and signed up as engineers, right? Like this idea that these people probably had no interest in being part of the US like war machine, and nevertheless end up sort of just like feeding this ongoing bottomless appetite for war and destruction. So obviously there's been a lot of pressure on Biden in a lot of different directions, but the result, like the death of US service members, is causing him to ramp up the military rhetoric. There are now confirmed reports of the US military being on standby for ground involvement in Gaza. I will say that I would consider to be extremely unlikely. I wouldn't over worry about that particular consideration. It's, the military has sort of like prepared conditional exercises for a lot of different things. So I wouldn't say that that's a likely thing to happen now, but the fact that they've even started to consider it is obviously a really worrying development for the continued escalation of violence in the region. And a lot of military analysts have been talking about like, well, what choice does Biden have, and like, how do they respond to this situation? And I wanted to note an incredible, I think, overlooked bit in this Axios piece / generally in the reporting about Biden's military response, where it says specifically, Biden administration officials believe a ceasefire in Gaza is key to reducing regional tensions. And they even admit that during the last humanitarian pause, all attacks on US forces basically stopped. So like the answer here is incredibly obvious. And even the Biden administration acknowledges that the way forward here is a ceasefire, and the way to de-escalate is through a ceasefire. And yet he has not done that, and he continues to not do that. And Biden continues to be really antagonistic to the idea of a ceasefire. And so it can feel a little bit crazy making, I think, to be in the situation where it's so obvious that something needs to be done, and Biden refuses to do it. And, which is not to say that Biden isn't doing anything, right? Biden is doing some things. A few days ago, he told Elmo that neighbors should be there for each other. So I'm really glad that he's taking the time to do that. That seems to be the top of his priority list. In all seriousness, no, the thing that Biden has sort of conceded to in the past couple of days is, for the first time ever, an executive order targeting Israeli settlers in the West Bank for the violence that's been happening against Palestinians in the West Bank. It's a weak implementation of that order, quite frankly. This first round of it has issued sanctions against 4 individuals. And if you've attended past PSAs, you've seen the sort of scale of West Bank settler violence, which is coordinated with and financed by the Israeli state. And so the idea of going like up to sanction a few individuals as a way of addressing this systemic form of violence is obviously woefully insufficient. Not to mention that in the US, you can give tax-deductible donations to Israeli settlements and to the Israeli settler project in the West Bank. So it's a small win, but I do want to just acknowledge the importance of this win, because it is a historic shift, in decades of US policy. And I think, and unless anyone can correct me on this, the first time the US government has taken concrete action to punish Israeli settler violence. And so I think it does mark an important shift that we need to understand as hopefully the first step in a sort of changing broader political landscape. And I do think that change is happening, and just to look at, I think, some of the updates on news on the boycott, people at the start of this round of ethnic cleansing have called for the boycott of Starbucks, McDonald's, and Disney. And, it's really rare for boycotts to work in a way that actually affects the bottom line of giant multinational corporations. But the scale of these is so big that it's actually impacting the profits and the stock prices of these companies that are being boycotted. And so it's an incredible advancement of, I think, the ways that the sort of concerted collective effort to sort of push the needle, not just to not only the protests, not only the raising awareness, but to actually affect the underlying material conditions by which the US is complicit in the genocide in Palestine, are really starting to sort of move the needle in a way that I think we really can't ignore, and I think is a cause for a little bit of hope, going back to that question about how we sustain hope. The broader context is very dark, but the things that are moving are really moving. And I wanted to take a moment just to acknowledge the things that have happened just in the past 7 days. So since the last time I spoke about this last Friday, there were half a dozen disruptions at Kamala Harris's event. A Chevron private dinner with the CEO of Chevron was disrupted so many times it was canceled. A group of over 1,000 Black pastors sent a letter to Biden calling for him to call for a ceasefire. San Francisco's brief moment in the sun as the largest city to call for a ceasefire has now been replaced by Chicago. The Santa Clara Board of Education has also passed a ceasefire resolution. The University of Michigan's Faculty Senate has voted to divest from the Israel military occupation of Palestine. And incredibly, one of the transport companies that has been regularly protested for its association with an Israeli weapons manufacturer has cut all ties with a weapons manufacturer. All of this in 7 days. So just to say that we're in a pretty incredible moment, I think, where the material conditions are meaningfully being affected in a way that I think we should be really proud of, and really speaks to this sort of ongoing effort and organizing of everybody probably that is attending these calls and is participating in these various actions. So I did want to take a moment to appreciate that. And one of the ways I think that's showing up is, of course, fundraising. I would have had of AIPAC's fundraising. It's and the giant mega donors that have provided them with $90 million just in the past few months. But if you look at fundraising for pro-ceasefire, pro-Palestine, anti-war candidates, you're seeing something really incredible. Rashida Tlaib, since her censorship on the House floor, has raised almost $4 million. And that's more than most Senate candidates. And this is coming from small grassroots donations. And, we don't have to look all the way to Michigan. Our own local pro-ceasefire, anti-war candidate for supervisor in District 9 is the one who has already accrued the most donors, the most local donors, and the smallest average donations. So these sort of like changes in the underlying electoral landscape are going to massively, I think, impact the sort of political trajectory for how our representatives talk about Palestine and ceasefires and war generally. So another thing I think to be proud of. So with all of that, I just want to close out with the usual things to plug into. Just make sure that you're responding to the ongoing repression of students who have organized anti-war walkouts at San Francisco Unified, to support the people who were arrested for blocking the Bray Bridge, to call for a ceasefire, and obviously the March primary election is coming, so get involved however you can. And if you need things to plug into, AROC's calendar of events is a great place to see all the things that are happening. And lastly, if you just want to get these updates on like more specific things regularly, I always encourage folks to just text our text blast system so you can stay up to date on what AROC is doing. And I think that's it for me. So I just want to say thank you all for the time, and it's always a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Summer, for the comprehensive updates as usual. Now to talk a little bit more about war profiteering, and with a case study on the L3 Harris action that just recently happened, please welcome Sarah.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I'm going to share my screen to talk a little bit about my slides. But before I talk a little bit about L3 Harris as a case study, I wanted to just sort of tie it back to this idea that genocide is being manufactured here in the Bay Area, and why I believe that the Bay Area has many targets that are worth for us to focus on and really pay close attention to. So we all are familiar with sort of our core demands. A big core demand is to end U.S. military aid to Israel. With our calls for a ceasefire, we want an immediate end of U.S. aid to Israel, as billions of our taxpayer money is going to armaments and weaponry that Israel is using to kill Palestinians. But what does U.S. military aid to Israel actually mean? During the Obama administration, a memorandum of understanding signed in 2016 was, quote unquote, the single largest pledge of military assistance in US history, with $38 billion over a 10-year period from 2019 to 2028. The vast majority of that money, 33 billion or 87%, is funding that is earmarked to be spent specifically for products from US manufacturers. Now, what that means is that when the US sends military aid to Israel, it's not just a blank check that Israel can spend on whatever they want. The vast majority of it, 87%, has to be spent at US manufacturers. So it's more like if the US gave Israel a store gift card, and Israel can only spend that money at that store and nowhere else. And in this case, those stores happen to be the likes of RTX, L3 Harris, General Dynamics, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, et cetera, et cetera. And they all happen to be here. Most major weapons manufacturers have a presence in the Bay Area. Base Systems, some of the ones that I've named, Northrop Grumman, Palantir, and more. Now you may wonder, why are they in the Bay Area? These corporations are drawn to Silicon Valley because of the tech and research and development, or R&D labor force that they can tap into here. For instance, Boston Dynamics, while it's headquartered in Massachusetts, it acquired a Bay Area-based startup in 2019 that became its first West Coast office. And the VP of Business Development at Boston Dynamics said, we'll be establishing our presence in the Bay Area for hiring a wide variety of hardware and software specialists, thanks to that acquisition. A lot of these companies have their tech and engineering centered functions and teams here in the Bay Area. So Boeing has its secure computing solutions out in Pleasanton. General Dynamics has its General Dynamics IT in Hayward, L3Harris, its Applied Technologies business in San Leandro, Lockheed Martin, its Advanced Technology Center in Palo Alto, et cetera, et cetera. So this is not a faraway conflict, as a lot of folks who are not, embedded in this struggle seem to believe. This genocide is very much manufactured right here. We know that the weapons that are made by the US, sometimes in our backyards, are being used in some of the deadliest Israeli attacks in Gaza. Back in December 5th, an Amnesty International report came out that analyzed some of the fragments of the bombs that were used to airstrike the homes of civilians, along with a healthcare worker and his family. And those bombs, the JDAM bombs, joint direct attack munition bombs, are manufactured by Boeing with L3Harris components, for example. So there isn't a lot of transparency around what armaments are being sent to Israel, but we can gather some clues from different sources about how these manufacturers are connected to the ongoing genocide. And from the research that we did, at least 6 companies with a Bay Area presence are responsible for manufacturing components and weapons that were sent to Israel and that are being used in its genocidal campaign in Gaza. I'm not going to go through this table in detail, but there's a couple of news stories that came out in December from the Biden administration bypassing Congress to have emergency sales to Israel for different components. There's a WSG report, a news story back in October, as well as a leaked list from the DoD that point to specific weapons and components by Boeing, Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, RTX, L3Harris, and Northrop Grumman, all currently being used in the genocidal campaign of Gaza. So why these targets? One thing that we know is that these companies have been framing the genocide as a win for their investors. Senior executives have gone on record, but there have also been leaks of private calls where they are boasting about the potential for this genocide to be good for business and the record profits that they're making or that they're expecting to make. And blood is very much on their hands. The CEO of RTX was talking about how this is going to lead to additional orders for missiles. The CFO and executive VP of General Dynamics is talking about how this is the potential for incremental demand for the artillery side of their business. So, excuse the pun, but these manufacturers are very much making a killing from this genocide. Their stock prices are rising. They have increased demand. For example, General Dynamics ramped up their capacity to produce certain projectiles up more than 6 times than they used to prior to October 7th. And they are decreasing their costs as some of these executives have talked about not needing to spend as much money in lobbying as they used to. And then another, I think, important element for us to consider about why these targets are important is that Palestinian trade unionists have called to international counterparts and all people of conscience to disrupt the funding, creation, manufacture, transport, and trade of these weapons. They have made that urgent call in October 16th. They have renewed it on November 9th and 10th, and then again on December 1st. And it's worth considering, given why these companies come to the Bay Area, is that part of the supply chain these corporations rely on includes employees. And in the Bay Area, these employees are highly specialized pools of engineers and tech workers. So with that context in mind, I think a couple of goals or strategic goals in targeting these manufacturers is, one, to put them on blast, and two, to make it costlier for them to do their work. And I'll talk about each goal in a little bit more detail. So putting these manufacturers on blast consists of basically making the invisible visible. A lot of these manufacturers, their locations, their offices, their facilities are quite literally hiding in plain sight in our neighborhoods, hospitals, and schools, while they are helping Israel destroy Palestinian neighborhoods, hospitals, and schools. So some of the possible tactics are, media coverage, political education, social media callouts, flyering, wheat pasting, and creative direct actions to visibilize who they are and what they make in their neighborhoods, etc. And then the second goal is to make it costlier for them to do their work, whether that's engaging in work stoppages and disruptions, making it more difficult and costly for them to hire and maintain their labor force, potentially pressuring employees to try and make them leave and make it harder for other potential future employees to stomach working for them. And quite frankly, just making it socially unacceptable to work for these manufacturers out here. And possible tactics here can include picketing, shaming, and putting employees on blast, disrupting job fairs, infiltrating, jamming online job applications, pressuring recruiters, as well as longer-term strategies that can include campaigns that are targeting local and state contracts. So with those two goals in mind, I wanted to present a case study for L3Harris. And Thomas talked about an action that we conducted last week, but it was the second of two actions that we did with L3Harris. The first one was a smaller one that was sort of like our palate cleanser and sort of like helped us prep for who this target is and why exactly it is that we wanted to put them on blast before the bigger action of last week. So in December 15th, our goals really was on the heels of the calls to action from Palestinian trade unionists. We really just wanted to heed the urgency of those calls. We wanted to put them on notice to tell them that we know who you are and what you do. We wanted to expose them to passersby and drivers-by, as well as gather information from a tactical standpoint and a temperature check around their police and security response, and announced our intent to come back. So we held a very small 30-person protest in front of their San Leandro facility. We shared information about who L3Harris is and what they manufacture through graphics on social media and flyers that we distributed on site. And we included art and work chants that spoke to their active role in this genocide, hence the tagline, genocide manufactured here, genocide manufactured in the Bay. These are just some pictures from the protests. Just going to go through them pretty quickly, some of the signs that we had. And I think this is a group shot with the altar that we put up in front of their lawn sign, along with the other posters and the giant genocide manufactured here banner that you will see again make an appearance. So we came back. We announced our intent to come back, and we went back last week. Our goal for the January 24th action was to escalate from the previous one and to draw connections to a group that has been particularly targeted throughout the last few months, that group being healthcare workers and healthcare facilities, given that this particular location actually happens to be across the street from a Kaiser hospital in San Leandro. We wanted to seek higher visibility in media coverage and really draw out the connections that they have with this genocide. And the second major goal was to stage a work disruption and ideally a work stoppage, and basically cost them money for the day. So we held a 400-person rally and protest. We occupied their auditory space. We occupied their physical space. We took over their parking lot. We blocked it for use by the company. We plastered their signage, their walls, their parked cars, adjacent sidewalks with guerrilla art, linking the company to the acts of genocide. We were able to get some earned media through a variety of outlets, from Al Jazeera to KQAD, ABC7, talking about the target and talking about what they do. And we ultimately prompted the company to shut down its operations for the day after 4 hours of being on site, and they sent their workers home, escorted by the cops. And again, because this is a facility, not just an office where workers are conducting testing on site, this wasn't a situation where the workers could just go back home and work from home. And based on our scouting, we also chose the day and the time to maximize the number of employees that we knew were going to be on site. So I'm just going to end it here and just share some pictures again from the action. This is the banner that we deployed over the archway at the entrance of the company. We had an installation with scrubs. On the other side of these scrubs are printed the names of healthcare workers from Gaza who have been killed by Israel. This is a banner drop that of that same banner, genocide manufactured here, that we climbed up the roof and dropped next to their sign and actually left there even after we departed. Again, some more sort of guerrilla art all across their facility. Some vinyl stickers that we put up on all of their lawn signs to make sure that even those people who were driving by knew what that company did. Some party favors that we left to the employees on their cars under their windshield, including a citation, or fake citation rather, and some blood money. We also included a memorial paying homage to the just incredible work that healthcare workers are doing in Gaza. And we sort of recreated this banner. I don't know if you've seen the picture on the right with the whiteboard with some of the healthcare workers that asked us to remember them. I think this is just a screenshot from the Al Jazeera live stream. So I'll just end here. I think we're still grappling with what's next, whether we're going to continue targeting the same company, whether we want to target some of these other manufacturers out here in the Bay Area. But thank you for having me. I really appreciate the time, and I look forward to hearing the rest of the speakers.
Sarah, thank you so much for this incredible work and organizing that you've been part of. There's a question in the chat about the who the we is, and so to the degree you can share a little bit about in the chat just how folks can get plugged in and be more involved, that would be great, and some of the organizations that they can plug into. That would be fantastic.
Thank you. Yes, so I roll with a number of formations, but this particular action has been organized by a couple of formations. One is Bay Area Palestine Solidarity, BAPS, BAPS, and the Healthcare Workers for Palestine Bay Area chapter. I will post on the chat because I can't remember off the top of my head the Instagram handles if you want to follow to learn more. But those were the two formations that were holding this down.
Thank you so much. Please stay on just a couple of minutes. We have some really important updates, legislative updates from Connie with APEN, and I'll hand it over to Connie to close this out. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. I'm just going to get started right away with a quick legislative update and call to action. If you're not able to stay on for long, this is the TLDR. There are some updates to what you might be calling in and asking from your elected representatives. Can screenshot that and go about your day. Thanks for staying on. And for those who can stay on for just a couple minutes longer, I want to provide some context for why we're making these updates to our demands and why it really is an important period to keep engaging with our representatives. So here in the Working Family Ceasefire Tracker, we're seeing that in fact, there are 66 members of Congress that have called for a ceasefire, cessation of hostilities now. And remember, we originally started with only 13 signed on to Cori Bush's resolution. The downside to this is that We certainly not enough, but it's really only 5 senators that have called for a ceasefire. And right now, this military funding, supplemental military funding package that Biden proposed and has been negotiated since last October is about to come to the floor again, as the Senate is saying, Schumer is saying that there's going to be a deal. Remember that this supplemental funding package funds both $14.3 billion in military funding to Israel and also $8 billion to border security and changes asylum laws. We don't know what this deal exactly looks like yet, so stay tuned over the weekend. But we know that it's going to come to a vote either Monday, Tuesday, or as late as Wednesday. So this is a really important period. If you've dropped off making the calls or the emails, a good time to pick back up. Some of you may have, or we may have previously talked about a resolution among a couple different initiatives in Congress to try to add human rights oversight and add, humanitarian aid to that supplemental military funding package. This was the only, resolution that really had teeth to be able to eventually investigate and freeze funding to Israel. But it wasn't able to even be discussed as the majority of senators voted to table the debate. But we did find out that Senator Butler, one of California's senators, was one of the 11 senators that voted against tabling the debate. And, we've been, many advocates have been engaging with Senator Butler's office for months now about calling for a ceasefire and calling for humanitarian aid. And she's been particularly concerned about human rights violations. So when you are contacting Senator Butler's office, please keep in mind that she did try to bring this to a vote. It wasn't necessarily a vote for it, but it is something that we can offer a little bit of praise for. Unfortunately, Senator Padilla has yet to act on any of his rhetoric around humanitarianism, humanitarian assistance, and remains to be seen what either of them will say about the military supplemental package that will likely be voted on early next week. But this is an important time when folks are thinking about actions and who to target or creative art projects to really think about our senators. Of course, we can't forget our representatives in the House. Continue to have major targets there. And of course, the fact that the Biden administration is actually bypassing Congress to approve arms transfers to Israel and also make unauthorized strikes in Yemen. And that's why we really need to call and email our reps daily. These are some links again, if you've lost them. I also suggest adding your representatives and the DA, of course, to help request that the DA drop charges against the Baber 78. Add them to your favorites, and also to Bird Dog reps. Join different formations or look into where our representatives are going to be so that there's no business as usual. And I'll just close out here with this slide of our demands, and that's the end of my time.
Connie, I can't thank you enough. Thank you for doing that in a rapid response way. All crucial information to stay connected. Thanks everyone for joining us. As long as they serve our goals for ending the genocide and liberating Palestine, we will work to make these PSAs possible. Special thanks to our ASL interpreters and our whole team for staying on for a little longer. Please encourage others to join these PSAs and share the recordings that are available on our YouTube channel. In the meantime, stay connected and engaged. Our actions make tremendous difference towards impeding the war machine that our labor and tax dollars sustain, and our continued struggle against imperialism is a core part of our collective work for a liberated globe and a liberated Palestine. And we'll see you in the streets. Thank you all.